Hello, good evening and welcome to Biz First in Focus. Last week, the Cabinet of Ministers adopted the National Export Strategy. Now, what is the National Export Strategy and how will it help improve Sri Lanka's export performance? Our guest this evening was part of the drafting of the National Export Strategy. He was a national consultant for the logistics and boat building industries in particular, and now under the National Export Strategy he is leading the advisory committee for the logistics industry. He is Mr. Rohan Masakorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy Colombo and also Director General of the Rubber Export Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Rohan, thank you very much for coming on the show once again. Let me start off by asking a very general question. What is the National Export Strategy? How will it help improve Sri Lanka's export performance?
Yes, Sri Lanka wants to increase its exports through sides, the value of it, and to diversify its export basket, because we are traditionally known for tea, rubber, coconut and apparels and a little bit of here and there, and of course gem and jewellery. But that is not going to be enough for us to increase our total revenue out of exports and create new employment in new areas where we can be competitive in the world market. For that we need a strategy and how to move forward, and our aim is over the next 5 years to implement this new export strategy, supporting new areas of growth for export.
So this is a 5-year plan essentially?
Yes.
And what are the key sort of export industries that have been identified for development?
Yes, I particularly handle the boat building industry. Then you have the spices and then processed food, information technology, wellness tourism, as well as electronics and electrical items.
When you say wellness tourism, and sort of what sort of development does the National Export Strategy envision? Well,
being a tourist hotspot, we are getting a lot of tourists into Sri Lanka. So the Ayurvedic side of it and the wellness tourism is a new concept basically, where we can attract these travelers to use their dollars, to use the Sri Lankan historical traditional way of treating patients and ailments. So these are new area we are looking at, combining with our strength of tourism and attractiveness of the country.
This area is already sort of existent and there is work happening. So not only in wellness tourism but even in the other industries, you can see even in electricals and electronics there is some level of manufacturing that happens here. Even in boats it's happening already. So how exactly will the National Export Strategy assist the growth of these industries?
Exactly. Now, as you said, all of these industries are in a small scale. You see, if you look at the boat building industry which I handled, it's about $100 million to $150 million of turnover, whereas suddenly a ship comes in from dockyard or someplace, then our export income increases. But we are looking at targeted export expansion, in that sense, to make the $100 million to become $500 million by a target date of 5 years.
So in the boat building industry, the target is within the next 5 years you want to reach a sustained sort of revenue of $500 million per annum.
Per annum. So like that, each industry has put their targets, and we want to get to $20 billion of exports initially, and then go at 25 billion and start increasing the share of export for the national GDP, because that is the real growth of a country, we believe. So in that sense we will also create new employment opportunities, new technology being adopted by these industries, and also to get foreign direct investment to the country to manufacture and re-export. So the strategy involves all of that, plus of course to create the conducive environment of the country for exports. That means changing laws also.
When it comes to changing laws, now the National Export Strategy has been adopted by Cabinet. Is there a need to put it to Parliament as well?
It really doesn't need Parliament approval, but probably they might educate the parliamentarians of the strategy. But what happens is, for each segment of the selected areas, there's a lot of laws that the country needs to change to be competitive and efficient. For example, the Customs, the Ports Authority Act, things are, Customs Act is 200 years old. So this is one thing has been there for the last so many years. Everybody has been talking. Now it's time for actioning these things. So to support export competitiveness, the way doing business mechanisms, simplifying things, those are transaction costs to be reduced. So laws have to be changed. So that has to, if an act has to be amended, for example, the Airport Aviation Act, private public partnership to be coming up, you need to change these acts. So that has to anyway go to the parliament. So the strategy will be to amend some of these old laws to fit to the modern world. So those are the service side of amendments that needs. Then of course there will be quantitative requirements amendments in terms of sourcing and manufacturing. Then amendments to get foreign direct investment into this, but marketing, things like promotion and marketing, all these things are in the strategy.
So the biggest challenge to the implementation of the national export strategy is going to be
institutional politics as well as institutional reforms. All government institutions involved in export facilitation will have to gear themselves up to change for efficiency and more productivity for these particular sectors, and also our market strategy of marketing ourselves and getting FDI.
Given that for the past several decades we've been talking about the need for institutional and attitudinal changes in Sri Lanka, on the side of governance and even on the side of corporates, are you optimistic that these changes that are required for the implementation of the national export strategy will actually come to pass?
Well, political will is very important. Must give the credit to the Ministry of Development Strategies who came up with this project with the ITC International Trade Center and the European Union, because for 20 years we have been doing a lot of lip service, but there had been no action taken to come up with a strategy like this. I think the last was in the early 90s when late President Premadasa had this 200 garment factory project, and then export national export exhibitions and all these things started, but then it started dying down. There was a lot of talk, but there was no action talk about export. So I think the due credit has to be given to the government for taking this initiative. They took the whole private sector into one place, we had these meetings, consultations. That's why it took nearly 1 year to come up with the strategy where everybody had to agree. There was public-private sector consultations, repeated questioning of ourselves. Okay, is this the right thing? Is this the right thing?
I'm going to stop you right there. You mentioned public-private consultations. We're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to ask the question, probably the most important question when it comes to the implementation of national strategies and agreements. Did you consult the professionals associations? That coming back on the other side. Welcome back to Biz First in Focus. We're in conversation with Mr. Rohan Masakorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy Colombo, Director General of the Rubber Manufacturers and Exporters Association, and he was also a national consultant for the logistics and boat building industries in the development of the national export strategy. When we left off, we were talking about the process that was followed over the past year in developing this national export strategy. Now we've seen in the recent past that one of the biggest obstacles to trade agreements and national strategies, whatnot, has been the opposition of professionals associations. So were these professionals associations like the GMOA, the Professionals National Front, the IT Professionals Associations, did you consult, were these parties also consulted in the sort of development of the national export strategy?
Definitely not the GMOA, but the IT people who were very much involved in the IT sector, the selected sectors and the overall export sectors, that is all the chambers, associations that represent exports, services that represent exports such as freight forwarders, the shipping industry, all of them including the public sector were brought in for about 6 or 8 consultations. We not only consulted in Colombo, we went out to the regions, even to the north, east, south, Hambantota, to all these areas the chambers organized. People particular areas, say for example boat building, we had to go to Gaul and ask how they feel about the development of the fisheries harbours, the boats, the availability facilities, all those were consulted. So relevant industries to the export industry, yes, non-relevant people, no.
So let me sort of rephrase the question, because you said definitely not the GMOA. Now the GMOA has been expanding their expertise beyond beyond medicine into trade and economics, governance, etc., just to name a few. So given this expansion of their expertise, do you envision the GMOA being opposed to any specific amendments or changes that are being proposed through the National Export Strategy?
That's yet to be seen, but of course as citizens of this country they have the right to comment and disagree if they feel that they have the expertise on this particular area. So we have to wait and see how they would react when officially the document is launched on the 19th of July, I believe.
Let's get back to the National Export Strategy itself. With regard to the logistics and boat building industry, you said that you were looking at, for boat building at least, you were looking at over the next 5 years reaching a sustained level of revenue of about $500 million US dollars, turnover, sorry, of $500 million US dollars per annum in the boat building industry. Now the boat building industry, as you mentioned, is quite small in Sri Lanka with a few big players. How will the different institutions, the Ministry of Development Strategies and Trade, the Export Development Board, the Shippers Academy, for example, how will these various institutions sort of assist this growing industry to reach that target under the National Export Strategy?
Yeah, so EDB, as you said, is going to be the main component. They are the drive force that is sitting there, and the export strategy does not stop at a strategy level. We have appointed committees already consisting of experts from the industry. They will be selected and gazetted for 3-year period. Officials have been appointed, and these officials will be following the implementation. So for example, now I am chairing logistics. We have what's called point of actions. Each industry has come up with X number of point of actions over a period of 5 years on the reform agenda. That has developed through the industry talking together. So they have said these things have to be achieved, and we have got timelines for those things. So we are monitoring and we are following up with these respective ministries and institutions. For example, with customs, the entrepot system has been redesigned. So we are now following, the official letters have gone to the Director General. We are following up when the official process will start. So like that, the industry is not disconnected from the implementation. Industry is connected with the implementation, and we have the right to shout and say you have not done this, and therefore our targets are going to be missed. So there is a follow-up process from the industry with sitting with the government officials. They are also in the committees. They are themselves sitting in our advisory committees. So they cannot move away and say that okay, we cannot do this. Then we have a mechanism to go to the top and say, look, this is not happening at highest level, cabinet level, we will have to take a decision.
So this has been happening in the past as well. I mean, industries have had access to take their grievances to the highest levels of government in the past as well. But the sort of the structural and institutional changes that that businesses have been asking for have not transpired in the past several decades under several different governments. Why? What makes you think that this time around it's going to be different?
Well, 20 years we haven't had an export strategy. I've been in the export industry for 25 years. 20 years we haven't had this kind of export strategy and point of actions to look at and drive. I mean, we used to meet, each industry association goes and complains at the exporters forum or something that has not happened. Now it's a collective work. Government, private sector and industry experts working towards their own goals. So we are part and parcel of the implementation to make sure that it happens on. Then at least we know we are also responsible, that we have not told. Sometimes these things happen, people don't tell. They complain within but don't go and tell the actual place where it has to be fixed. So obviously there has to be political will, whether this government or the next government comes. We don't know what's going to happen in the political arena, but if we have to have export led growth.
On that note,
yes.
Rohan, we need to go in for a short commercial break. An election year is coming up. We have a history in this country of policies changing from government to government. if there is a change in government, what does that mean for the newly adopted national export strategy? That's coming up on the other side. Welcome back to Biz First in Focus. We're in conversation with Mr. Rohan Masakorala, who was a national consultant in the development of the national export strategy. Now, when we left off, we were talking about sort of the importance of having a strategy in place and why that is going to make a difference this time around in actually bringing about institutional and structural changes that are necessary to improve Sri Lanka's export performance and thereby overall economic performance as well. Now, an election year is coming up, 2019-2020. They are going to have provincial council elections probably this year. There hasn't been a clear indication yet. But there is, with the sort of the political turnover that is sort of anticipated in the coming year and a half, what does this mean for the national export strategy? Is it going to also die a premature death?
I don't think so, because exports are important for any government. So, and it's a fundamental for this country. We are having a debt problem, so we need to increase our foreign exchange earnings. We need to build reserves through real earnings at the central bank. We need new jobs, new technology. We need to diversify exports. Irrespective of politics, this is economics of the country. So we feel that we will get the necessary support from the cabinet ministers across the table. I don't see why not, because nobody is going to get a negative result out of this. Any minister or a parliamentarian would like to have more factories, more employment. That's their vote base. So politically it's right for them to expand exports, and also the country's northeast needs factories and production. So it's politically positive for anybody if your particular electorate or area is getting a factory or new orders for export. So I don't think politicians would derail this, but as you said, their time and commitment might be focused on politics, we understand, but then it's not only politicians who run the country, bureaucrats, we ourselves as industries, we also have our own responsibilities, and this is for the benefit of the export industry across. It doesn't stop at the selected areas. As I said, if we make our logistics efficient, if I call it quality assurance efficient, information portals efficient, the rest of the industries who are already existing also will benefit. Whether it's apparel, tea, rubber, they are also mature industries, they will also benefit. So if overall export revenue starts getting up, that's a good thing for the country, and people will also benefit out of that. That's the bottom line of export development.
The political climate, though, is quite toxic right now, and while what you say has a ring of reason and logic to it, we find that logic and reason don't necessarily govern the political aspirations and political ambitions of honorable politicians. So in such a sort of a toxic political climate, where policies and strategies, and even if it's for the good of the electorate and the constituents and the country as a whole, are simply rejected because it was a baby of the former government or the former administration, are you confident that it will be different when it comes to the national export strategy?
Yeah, that happens in this country, but still they might change the name, but the same thing might go on. That does happen. We are in fact in stormy weathers, and we have to navigate this process through stormy conditions. So that is the challenge for us that we have to face, and we cannot run away from that, because we have done a lot of sweat and time put onto this project. Irrespective of who's going to be there in political climate, we will again make sure if we miss by 1 year, we will push it from the next year onwards. Who comes, that has to be there is no other option for us as professionals and the industry.
Let's get back to the strategy itself. Now, you are also the Director General of the Rubber Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Now, you mentioned in response to my earlier question that mature industries like tea, rubber, coconut, apparels are not really included in the national export strategy, that it doesn't really have much to do with mature industries. Why is that?
Well, these industries are already know that what their advisory councils and their mechanisms are going forward right now. For the last so many years, Export Development Board has been working with them, so they know where to draw the line in terms of their business areas, whereas the smaller areas have to get support. They have to grow. Some of them are like in the mini incubation period and kind of not up to global standards. So to getting them into that level for become a $1 billion industry or something like that, you need a strategy for them to move forward, not only locally but internationally, getting foreign direct investment. For example, apparel industry, all the international brands are here, but for example, we want to get boat companies to come in, yacht companies to come in here. We need to get the systems organized here, market it out there, get the FDI. So both BOI and the EDB has to do their role with the industry together. So these are particular industry that we feel that there is market opportunity outside there, as well as we have the capability to get going.
Now you mentioned, like, if you take the apparel industry, there are, as you mentioned, big brands that have come here. There are big players here who are actually now creating their own brands and who are exporting and who are actually providing FDI for other countries as well, opening up in the apparel sector at least. But if you take tea and rubber, your particular area of concern, for example, it's not like Sri Lanka's tea and rubber exports are stellar performers. Don't you think that these industries also need a degree of support?
They do get the degree of support from the export development. There are advisory council, there are mechanisms. Now for example, I must tell you, the rubber industry unveiled the rubber master plan in 2016, supported by the government at the highest level, and we are actually now working towards the reforms of getting in technology and services, and we are implementing the rubber master plan. It's a 10-year plan. So it's rubber industry is about close to $1 billion right now. The biggest problem we have is raw material, shortage of raw material. Plantations need to be expanded, replanted. Under the master plan, these things are right now happening. So that particular industry's master plan is driven by public-private partnership.
And I imagine there's a lot of potential for Sri Lanka to move from simply exporting sort of raw rubber to,
we don't export raw material.
To actually go into value addition and have well, rubber as the raw material, but value-added products drawn from rubber.
So hard tires, Sri Lanka controls 30% of the world market. So gloves, we have big problem is the raw material right now, and technology and skills for expanding new products. In fact, we are importing raw material. There is a misconception that we are sending raw rubber. It's not the case. Our industry is buying up everything. They are short of raw material. The problem here is the world rubber market prices. Okay. That's the one that has the problem. So we have to work on market.
So there's also, when you say raw materials, there's also another problem in the limited sort of land resource.
Exactly. So under the master plan, we have identified what to do, where to do. In fact, we are even proposing north and east to be identified for plantations of rubber products. It's a carbon plus product also. It has additional value of the rubber wood. So there are a lot of things that we are in line working towards this, and the Rubber Research Institute, the Plantation Ministry, all of them, Sub-Rubber Secretariat, together we have started implementation the rubber master plan. So as a mature industry, it's been supported.
As getting back to our emerging industries and the national export strategy, just one final question before we wrap up. 5 years is the sort of the target period. 5 years from now, if we were back on the same platform, would the country have successfully implemented the national export strategy?
That's my dearest hope, and I am working towards it with all the stormy conditions around, and as you said, the elections coming up. But for the country's sake, I think exports are. Do
you see calmer seas on the other side of the storm?
Always hope is there, and hope is the one that takes us forward.
Thank you very much, Rohan. It's, as always, an absolute pleasure. There's always hope, and hope is what takes you forward. Even if you can't see the calmer seas on the other side, the clouds still do have silver linings. That's BizFirst in Focus. I'll see you again on the review on Friday at 9:30. Good night and good luck.